Hello to you. I'm Tash Mitch and I'm with Jane Alexander. And we basically put together these healing spaces once a week where we either do a meditation or we drop into something that is alive for us, but also something that actually would be very helpful if we shared our own experience and shared our process with you. So that you can actually see your own journey clearly through our journey as well, and maybe can share something of your journey with us so we all grow together. So this time we're actually delving into the inner guru and what it means to actually express the inner guru. So allow yourself to express that inner teacher, that inner master, that inner guru aspect of yourself without judgment, and to allow that to come through without judgment. Because when we actually try and plug into the collective on the inner guru stance, there's all these little packages and bows and nice little boxes that are there for us to plug into. And so then it really starts to hinder our own expression of what inner guru is coming out for us. And so what happens when we let go of those boxes and let go of those nicely wrapped ways of expressing, and just allow the expression of what wants to be there to come through without judgment, right? So Jane, what do you say about this?
No, it's just, so I generally think that we should start maybe with just something where we come into relationship with inner guru as a kind of presence, within us, because I often think that sometimes these things need, because it's not something that we really know with the mind. It's something that we experience and know with the deeper part of us. It's a recognition thing, really, for me.
Yeah.
Guru. It's like in lots of ways, I think I tend to think of the spiritual journey as almost like a journey into the recognition of the inner guru that's always been there. It's like, and essentially it's not really the mind that recognizes that. It's more a case that the mind learns to be subservient to that. Which is why we kind of sometimes project this stuff out and play it out with teachers or whatever, but essentially, the essence of it is that journey of a learning to allow our mind to be subservient to our, divine soul knowing, and to allow for that switch around, really. So yeah, is that good? Shall we start with like a little?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just come to a place.
And I love, you can lead us with that one.
Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah.
No pressure then. All right.
It's what you do so naturally, Jane. It's like breathing air to you. So.
Okay, so maybe just the invitation here is just to close your eyes and just to allow the fullness of your presence. So just allowing all that you are to be here in this moment. Allowing all that you know and all that you don't know. Allowing all that you love and all that you struggle with. Allow all that you are willing to accept and all that you are pushing away. And just allowing an openness to that soul wisdom, that sacred bridge.
There's a deep sense of just welcoming in who you are as a divine entity, as a divine being. Just allowing your presence as divinity to be there, to be in your awareness and your consciousness.
And recognizing this as your beginning, your origin. Before you were everything else, you were this. Before your mind developed, before you had understanding, you were this divine presence.
And just noticing in this relationship of connecting consciousness to your divine presence, that it is your divine presence that becomes the teacher here. So often we think it's all in the mind, all in the consciousness. But there's something that is surrendering in the consciousness so that we can recognize that divine presence.
And just feeling that recognition deepening. And it will do this quite naturally. Once you've given the permission, layers of recognition just happen by themselves. There's no need to earn this or deserve it. It's always just a breath away.
So I will say, welcome home, divine being. Yeah.
And isn't it beautiful how held we are? It's like, for me, it's the relationship with divine presence that holds me, that holds the human that I am.
Yeah. And it puts the human into a different context in that way, because when it's just us and our human, the human that is us, it is so isolating. It is so you feel like you have to do it all alone, and that nobody understands and no one can understand because it's just you on this walk, and nobody can see inside your head and what's going on, that kind of thing. And so it kind of starts to narrow down the world and contract the world. So it becomes very isolating, this guy's just me, he's just me. And then basically, as soon as we drop into this level of awareness and this level of knowing, you realize, that you are being held. You are being, in essence, you're being animated.
Yeah.
And so it's then opening the consciousness for that relationship with the animator,
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny, isn't it? Because once we're in that kind of like, it's just me here. I mean, I can possibly recognize that state at all. So when we get there, it's like, at that point, that's when the mind goes, oh my God, this is not okay. It's not safe. Oh my God. And that's when we start grasping. That's when we start going, the mind goes, I need something, someone, glass of wine, whatever it is. I need, because I've got to feel held, because I think there's such wisdom actually in that grasping, because that grasping, when we get there, essentially the mind is really recognizing that it's lost its sense of being held by the divine, and it's desperate to have that back. And there's real wisdom in that. You know, I think sometimes we can like beat the hell up out of ourselves because we get into those spaces, and yeah, they're crap, you know. But also there's deep wisdom in there, you know. It's like, you know, it's that thing, isn't it? Because the ego is always kind of the backup plan, you know. It's like, you know, it's like, it's essentially, I often feel like my ego is like, well, if she doesn't remember that she's divine by herself, I'll just deny her to death until she does.
It's so true. It's so true. You know, it's kind of like the thing about it is I've actually started to I've developed a different relationship with my triggers. And I say that in a very wide sweeping way, but I'm sure that, you know, that I'll be discovering other things about this. But basically, you know, but when I feel that contraction, when I feel that sort of sense, and you feel it as an internal isolating, contracting feeling, you know, and as a result, it becomes just you. It becomes just all about you, and it's just you. And the thing about it is there's a kind of density sort of around it. So the feelings in there can be either painful or hurt-inducing, or just kind of like just emotional density, right? When I'm in that place, I've started to learn to get very curious. You know, because when I'm in that place, I've realized that I've reached my boundary somewhere, and it's not always evident where the boundary is, you know, or what even the boundary is saying to me. So, for example, if I find myself in front of someone and that person is just upsetting me, then, you know, there's kind of like, there's something in there where it becomes about projection, where you're like, oh, you're upsetting me, and you're doing this, and you're doing that, and it's all about you, and you're doing this to me. Like, I've learned now to take a pause before going into that animation of like, it's all about, and really start to feel into, okay, so you're upsetting me now. What is that? You know, where is that in me? What is that saying to me? Where is it? Where is it? And what is it saying? And then start to get really curious on the internal. It doesn't negate the fact that you might have to find yourself in front of that person saying, you're upsetting me, but these are my triggers. We've reached the boundary. I reached the boundary here, you know, and I feel like you're knocking on it or crossing it, like you might have to articulate that. But ultimately, when you go to articulate it, it's from a place that is far more, it's got far more wisdom in it, and far more understanding and knowing in it. And so it allows for healing to occur on both sides as a result. Yeah.
But also, you know, in that context, you know, boundary is about, you know, is as much about the other person as it is about you. It's not so much about holding them out. It's about going, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not resolved here. And for us to be able to continue to relate, you know, we're going to need this line, because otherwise, you know, I'm going to start to feel out of control, you know. And that, you know, and there's it's funny, isn't it, that there can be a deep unity in a kind of, in a disagreement. You know, there can be a deep service of the divine in those moments, you know. So I was thinking about intimacy the other day, and I was thinking about, you know, like how our most intimate relationships can remain spaces of love, you know. And I realized that actually it's actually all in, you know, where the need for boundary arises. It's paradoxical, isn't it? You know, that it's in how we communicate, you know, those challenge points in relationship, that actually, you know, a deeper trust and a deeper intimacy can arise. You know, which is most things are the opposite from the way you think they are, as like a rule of thumb. I think, you know, it's like, if my mind is telling me it's a certain way, then it's probably the other.
Yeah, it's true. And that's where the curiosity is necessary, because if you're not curious, you end up going down this merry road. and it doesn't really lead anywhere because it's not really the road, you know. And I say that from the point of view, one of the things that brought this conversation forward was very much about the inner guru and the exploration of what it means to express the inner guru, right? And as a result of expressing the inner guru, there's elements that are going to come up. You're going to bump up against the collective mindset of what it looks like to be a spiritual being, let's say, or what it looks like to express spirituality, or what it looks like to express your soul, what it looks like to express your very inherent being, your divinity. Like basically, you're going to bump up against what society says it's supposed to look like and what you feel is actually coming through us, you know? And this is a merry road that sometimes it's like you can find yourself having judgments and then pacing over the societal, the societal judgment of what that is. When actually, if you just allow what is there, you get shown a different layer that you yourself wasn't familiar with, you know? Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's this thing about what divine expression actually is and what it actually means to be a person, you know, because it's funny, isn't it? Because the experience of being human is that we have this sort of, deep, there's this availability of a very deep and flowing and, kind of moment to moment, sort of expressive of divine experience. That's kind of what it's like, isn't it? Sort of inside, things rise, we don't really know why, and there's feelings, and there's mystical insight, and there's realization, and there's kind of laughter and tears, and that's what it's like. We're this kind of fluid, kind of fascinating, unfixed reality, but we're also relational, so we also, we're not just, it's like we also are a relational being, and we also get our definition through how we relate to each other. And sort of finding that balance between those two things, I find personally deeply challenging. It's kind of, it's, and I think for each of us it's different as to which half of that we find more challenging. I think for some people, that idea of actually just allowing whatever is going on inside them to rise and fall is deeply challenging. Whereas for others, it's much more, how do I, interact with others, and other people find that space really, really challenging. And it's interesting, isn't it? I think that the journey is essentially the dance between the two. That's what it means to be alive. It's to be engaged in that dance.
There's something here about, I want to say like a divine request, but there's something here that happens where you can actually say, I don't want to be overwhelmed. Like you can actually say that. Or you can say, I want this to come forward with grace and ease. I mean, that's my language, right? And off the back of that is, I don't particularly want to be looking like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards here. So grace and ease. So for me, that is very much my languaging, and it's very much how flow comes forward for me. Like it's very much on that. I want to say it's a request. I can also equally say it's a command, because it's so strong in the, I want to say it's really hard to explain and put words to it, because I want to say it's a desire, but it's not a desire. It's a command would probably be the better word for it. It's a basically, this is how this is coming through for me, grace and ease, like that. And what I found in that space, because sometimes when I say grace and ease to people, they're like, well, life can't be grace and ease all the time, like that. And no, that's not the definition I'm talking about. So I'm not talking about you are lying back in sort of like this feather boa bed, you know, like this, and nothing bad is ever happening to you.
Oh, why not? I think that'd be beautiful.
You know, because like realistically, you know, but on the other side, what I found in it is that the deepest challenge could be happening to you, and there's something that comes in of the fluidity of that, where the ways that you're dealing with it, it has that grace and ease frequency in it, that you're finding yourself getting through things that are just like you're looking back at the road going, whoa, you know, and that just happened. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, you know, there's a succinct flow in the way you get through. And it is a command that you put in place for that, because sometimes I witness when people don't have, it doesn't have to be grace and ease, you can find your own language around that. But I find when people don't have that in the way that they're relating to the intensity of energy coming forward, if they start to pace the language of overwhelm and really intense and, you know, there's some real high vibrational language that you could put on that's just contracting. It becomes an experience where hedge backwards is what you start to look like. You know, you start to sort of, it starts to look like you've gone through the ringer. Like, I've gone through the ringer, you know, all of these kind of like sort of very high vibrational, very high intensity, but very contracting language patterns. That then means that energy that was wanting to flow through is now finding it's coming through like a sort of like needle, the eye of a needle, you know, and there's this whole backlog of energy, and it's like trying to find its way through this like little space that you've given it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, because, you know, because essentially what you're describing there, isn't it, is the way that mind likes to have a cohesive story about what it all means and what is happening, and the problem is that those stories can, you know, really kind of make the process more painful than it needs to be. You know, exactly, you know, isn't it? You know, and it's I think we are wise to tend to the stories that we're telling ourselves about our experiences. You know, we, you know, and it's understandable, isn't it? Because you have a rising, or, you know, you have a, you know, a profound dropping of the veil, or whatever, you know, you experience, or a deep emotional release. And, you know, and in that moment, you know, when those things, they come from nowhere, and in that moment, because they've come from nowhere and they've had the element of surprise, mind has completely dropped away. And even if it's been epic, it's also been fine, you know, deeply fine, because the bit of us that is concerned about what it all might mean has left the building for a while. You know, so you're just, okay, yeah, all right. You know, and then obviously then, as part of the coming round from that experience process, you know, mind picks up again. And then it starts having opinions about the experience. And that's where we can then, you know, kind of get those dense stories, can't we, that slow us down. And I always think that we have a responsibility, I think, as, you know, as people who are consciously engaging in this path, to be very alert to looking for security in story. You know, because obviously our stories help us, you know, our traditions help us. They do provide a stability, and that's very precious. But there is a but here, isn't there, which is, you know, we must also, I think, hold them lightly and be prepared for those stories to evolve and change, to allow our expansion.
Yes.
You know. Yeah.
I mean, one of the ways that I see that is like a new paradigm might want to come through, which is like something that's completely outside of your field of vision, in the sense of you haven't had that experience in this lifetime. So you have no context for what's coming forward. But the mind then wants to sort of like, oh, what does this look like? What does this look like? And then you drag some sort of something from the past that is not what it looks like at all. but it's kind of like, because you're looking for the security blanket, you drag this thing from the past and you plant it and paste it in front of this paradigm that you've just had. And as a result, you make this contracted into something that it was never intended to be, let's say, if there was an intention. Maybe for me, what I experience is that our souls have a overarching view of things, and so they're able, we're able to communicate on a soul level that allows something that is outside of our periphery vision or our periphery experience to be felt and to be integrated into this time-space reality that we're in now. Our time-space reality, the way that we might not have any context or any box to put that in. And so there's something here of relinquishing the box and just allowing what is to be there and to say, I have no idea what that is. I don't know. Just, okay, just like allow it to be what it is, And then it starts to reveal other aspects of itself to you. And in that revelation of the other aspects, you're then integrating it into a way that you've never seen and nobody else has ever seen. You know what I mean? And that's where that soul allowing is. What then happens is that when we try to paste something from the past onto it, it's like we make this thing something that's recognizable, but it's distorted at this point because it's not what it is,
And because what we're getting to here now, isn't it, is the truth of divinity, which is that it is inherently mysterious and unknowable.
Yeah.
So whenever you try to subscribe it to, you try to say this is what it is, at that point, you're no longer in true communion with divinity.
Yeah.
That's the price you pay. I mean, that's the price of our stories, is that actually they take us away from the very truth that we're seeking. And that's a very difficult thing to live with on the human level, because we want things to be knowable. That's the mind does. That's the mind's MO, isn't it? Is know stuff. But essentially we're learning here to be in relationship with something that cannot and will never be fully understood.
Yeah. And yet, because that is so true. And it's interesting in this conversation because basically Hermetics and Kabbalion says that everything is a half truth. So there's no absolute truth, right? So everything has a context of truth in it. So basically what you're saying is incredibly true. And I feel that truth, that the storytelling then constricts the experience. And then we have tried to box divinity. But being in a 3D reality means that expression needs articulation at times, and so there's something that can come forward that allows for that articulation to be very, very clear, very elegantly simple, very succinct, and very felt. So then it allows somebody else to have that experience. And there's a very different thing when the articulation's coming forward. So the way of speaking and the way of relating this experience is coming forward from ego space, and also from space that wants to be all clever about it. So then it kind of like starts to sort of twist the thing up in all of these different kind of ways, and then nobody knows what the hell you're talking about because it's like
I've got the bows again.
It's like the best way to describe that is the small print on the bank statements, so like the kind of like the legal documents where you're like, what are you talking about? What does that even mean? It looks amazing, everyone's in awe at how many words it took to say that thing, but actually nobody gets it, and there's something that could be like really there's something that's like really just elegant and simple, that can come forward. And this is, we have all of these great teachers, Jesus was like a really good teacher like that used to bring forward like these sort of parables that allow you to see what he's talking about, but then you're able to overlay it on your own life, and it makes complete and utter sense, and then it starts to unravel, and the depth of what is being said starts to kind of like come in echoes for you. ego can't really do that because it's too invested in itself. So basically there's something in the language that comes forward from your soul. I don't even know, from your soul, from divinity, however you want to say it, comes forward and allows for that to be expressed and articulated.
I mean, and maybe that's when, when the speaker, is in that moment, sort of not really themselves, and they are just, being the conduit, allowing the divine to use them. I have a little prayer I really like, which is, I just ask for, divinity, whatever word I'm using for that at the time, to sort of guide my hands and my voice, and my actions, and it's like, and what I'm essentially doing in that is I'm reminding myself to hand it over, and I don't think this has got anything to do with facilitation really, and I think it's got everything to do with just being alive and living. Imagine what the world would be like if every day we handed over.
I mean, that's like a walking meditation in and of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's just a walking meditation of how you live your life in and of itself. I mean, when you make that your way of being, you're continuously being guided in ways that you wouldn't be able, you're hearing in ways that you wouldn't be able to hear if you were going through the other way, which is tends to be quite mindless. And to be fair, I mean, there's no judgment in any of this because we're human. So there's always pockets of mindlessness in being human. It's just like the human experience, but there's something that actually is always giving space for divinity. And in that space giving, something else can actually be informed, Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and that's a nice play of light there. This is very interesting about the inner guru piece, just coming back to that, because basically the inner guru element or that inner teacher element or that element that wants to arise from you, it needs that level of the lack of a filtration system, let's say, where you don't have so many judgments. So that it could just allow itself to dance through you, and express through you. And that expression could be very, very beautiful if you allow it, This is where, for me, I just reiterate the grace and ease piece. This is where it becomes like this pleasure, and I feel the dance of the energy in me. I feel it. It came forward as this entity called Zook. And I'll say that because it's kind of like, I feel really vulnerable talking about this stuff these days because it's kind of like, it feels quite new to me still, to be speaking about these soul expressions. But I used to feel like the dance elements that used to come through as like this energetic sort of like just flow, and it just used to express itself. And I didn't have a word for it. I didn't even see it as anything. It was just like, and then this entity came through called Zook that was showing me how this expression has an aliveness in it. And if I'm mindful in the expression, if I open my consciousness in the expression, I can also be healing in that expression as well, because it allows for a mindful awareness of where the energy is going and how it's going there. So the dancer becomes the dance, becomes the dancing, becomes everything at once. It's opening the consciousness. And I'm saying all that to say is basically, I could, and I can still feel the judgment right here waiting to happen. I could put a lot of judgment on that. And as soon as I put, if I even try and overlay judgment on it, it becomes something contracted. It becomes something dense. It becomes something ugly. It becomes something unrelatable. And then all of the healing has gone out of it. All of the light has gone out of it. All of the divine flow has gone out of it. And now I'm sitting with something that is, you know, and that's not what it is, you know.
No. Because it's, you know, because our being, you know, so our consciousness is inherently creative, it's inherently playful.
Yes.
And it's like, and it's for me anyway, it's, I sort of see service really as being in service to that. It, you know, it's like, can I serve the creativity of consciousness as it is in me?
Yes.
You know, it's like, and obviously simultaneously then, can I serve the playing consciousness as it is in others? You know, because essentially it's the same thing. You know, and we might not always understand what the divine is creating through somebody. It might make no sense to us, but that's neither here nor there. Because I found that if you kind of take a breath and go back to curiosity, like you were saying at the beginning, but also allow for playfulness, and let yourself almost see another through those childlike eyes of sort of play and awe, then you then start to see the mystery in them. And for me, that's life-changing.
Yeah. So the invitation here is to start to, and you might be well on your path, so it's either to start to or to continue, you know, just allowing that inner guru, that inner teacher, that inner when I say master here, it is kind of like an old paradigm word in a certain kind of way, but then I try and figure a word that actually equates it in its meaning. And I haven't quite found one yet, but there's a mastery, and the mastery element is that element of being committed and available to. You know, it's that sort of sense of just being very committed, very open, very available to. So, for example, the divine mastery, let's say, is that commitment that you make to being the conduit of divinity, to allow divinity to flow through. And it's a moment to moment, constant coming back to. And ultimately, when I see mastery, that's what I see. It's like a continuous reiteration of the same patterning that allows that patterning to teach on deeper levels. You know, it's kind of like, and also finer levels. And so then you've got a width, you know, with a lengthening, a breath, you know, like that your understanding or knowing or connection to this thing is so multifaceted. That is what mastery is to me. It's not necessarily this kind of like, you know, being the master of over and kind of like your ego getting all sort of like bent into being the master. It's more a very intimate, finite relationship with something. And so this is what,
it's a deep self-knowing, isn't it?
yes.
It's like, you know, it's like, it's when you know self so lovingly that you no longer judge it. And you're also no longer carrying the expectation that it's definable. For me anyway, you know, because you get to that, you almost, there's a strange security that comes from going, oh yeah, I'm completely unfathomable. Who knows what I'm going to get up to today, you know, and not like personalizing, you know, the mental emotional experiences particularly that rise. You know, I think like something I see, you know, like when people are really struggling and really suffering with something, you know, often I'm talking, this is an internal emotional experience, not when there's something going on out beyond them, but you know, like sometimes that a lot of suffering really does come from, you know, an emotion that rises up, you know, essentially unprovoked. It's just bubbling up to the surface, and then a story is being very quickly told about what that emotion means about them. You know, so obviously the classic is anger, isn't it? You know, I'm a bad person because I'm angry. You know, then suddenly you've got not only the experience of anger, which can be tricky, you've also then got the experience of of disapproving of your own anger. You know, and then you can have, you know, and that layering can be quite extensive for us. You know, when really, you know, all that actually happened was a movement of energy through your body.
Mm. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
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 No.
Yeah. Yes. And you know, like I can feel that even as you say it, because yes, and if you've got a creative mind, then you know the story could become more intricate, and suddenly you've built up a story that's actually got absolutely nothing to to do with the experience that you've had in any way, shape, or form, but it kind of just sounds good to relay. And in the relaying of it, you start to create something that was never intended to be there, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just noticing there's no judgment in any of this. It's part of the human walk, you know. It's just noticing where you have this story going on and whether that story serves you or not. And also what would happen if you let go of the story altogether.
You know, essentially, if you just give yourself permission to be incohesive, if you give yourself permission to not be a thing,
yeah,
much easier in my experience.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. And always there's something that comes into form and then goes back out of form, you know. It's kind of like the life and death cycle is occurring constantly. So there's something that comes in as like a spirit or a movement or an animation. It comes into form, and that is where you might feel the need to articulate. You might feel the need to put it into some kind of context that is relatable to you and to others. And then you have to equally be willing to let that go so that it can become something else, or something else can come through. And what tends to happen with a lot of us is that we create the form, and then we get sort of like mesmerized by the form we've created, and we're there like this with the form, and there's a backlog of energy that's wanting to flow through. It's like, when is she gonna just take her eyes off?
Yes. Just put yourself down.
Step away from the form.
Step away from who you think you are.
You know, yeah. So yeah, it's that, it's allowing the dance to continue, right? It's allowing the dance to flow through and continue, really. So share with us the dance that you're having. Yeah. Share with us the dance that you're having as you're going forward. And if anything is arising for you in this conversation, then please share it with us. We're always glad to hear about, you know, what's going on with you. And we'll be here again next week. And also we'll be here because we're in the process of developing invitations and offerings in the very near future. So as these are taking form, we'll also be extending these out to you as well. All right. So Jane, any last?
No, it's great. It's been just such a joy.